Hey everybody, Jennifer Schaus here. Thanks for joining us in our webinar series covering the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. We're going through each of the parts on Wednesdays and Fridays at 12 Eastern. All of our webinars are complimentary and recorded. You'll find today's recording later on our YouTube channel. It should be there later this afternoon or by tonight. And if you're looking for the PowerPoint, we've already uploaded it to the slideshare.net site. You can log into slideshare.net with your LinkedIn credentials. And that's also, again, a complimentary site. We do have digital advertising options available in the webinar series. In order to register or look for actually any of the recordings, you can hop over to our website, click on the section called the FAR, and everything is listed there. Again, recordings as well as registration links, depending upon where we are in the schedule and in the series. We did actually cover the FAR in 2020. So all of the historical recordings are still out there on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. So if there's a part that you are anxious to get to, just keep in mind if you are looking at the 2020 version, things may have changed and been updated or pieces have been potentially taken out. So just keep in mind if you are looking at historical recordings, they are in fact just that. A quick blurb about us. We provide consulting services for established government contractors with a big focus on helping companies get onto the GSA schedule and then all of the services that go with that. More information about us is on our website under the About Us section. For companies that are selling to federal contractors, banks, law firms, insurance companies, payroll, etc., we offer digital marketing opportunities in our newsletter, webinars, and also whenever we have events, we have corporate sponsorships available. If you're looking for pricing on that, please drop us an email to the hello@Jennifer Schaus and ask us for the media kit. We currently have an offer. It's a buy one, get one in our newsletter, which now reaches over 30,000 primarily government contractors. You can see some of the statistics here. Again, if you've got questions or want to place an ad, just drop us an email. If you need help getting onto any of these contract vehicles, Navy Seaport Next Gen or NASA SOUP 4, or just the GSA schedule, again, please email us. For anyone that is contracting budgets, or if you're selling to any of the departments or agencies listed here, there are some budget request hearings that are happening on the Hill, both on the House and the Senate side. This is the schedule for next week. This will be posted in our newsletter. Sometimes these are good opportunities to network with other attendees there in the hearing. And get some information and intelligence about the budget request and how those dollars will flow to the various departments or agencies. We've got sponsored content webinars coming up in June, so a couple months away. It's a two-part series on SBIRs and STTRs. And that's put on by Carrie Palmatier of Palmatier Law. Those links are on our website under the event section. Even though these are webinars, it's listed under events. Again, these are remotely conducted webinars and they will be recorded. So we want to thank our sponsors. We've got GovEvents, Fairfax County, and Set Aside Alert. So our friends over at GovEvents, they are the premier platform for posting events related to government and government contracting. You can find all of our webinars and our events on govevents.com, as well as recordings from our past 600+ webinars. We also want to thank Tom Johnson and his team at Set Aside Alert. That's the go-to publication for contracting opportunities for small women-owned, veteran-owned, hub-zone, and 8A firms. Visit setasidealert.com for more information. The Fairfax Economic Development Authority has an online calendar of events and webinars, and we want to thank them for posting our events and webinars on their calendar. The Virginia Apex Accelerator, formerly known as the PTAC or Procurement Technical Assistance Center, is over at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. They offer free one-on-one counseling to established government contracting firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore their services, review homework recommendations, register for live training, and find useful links to agencies and other self-directed learning. One-on-one counseling is limited to eligible client companies, and appointment requests are handled in the order they are received, and also based on counselor availability due to very high demand. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on your business location. Join the Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce monthly government contracting council meeting. It's the last Tuesday of every month. The next one's coming up on Tuesday, April 23rd. You can network with your peers, learn about upcoming events, opportunities, and also contribute to future programming. If you have questions, contact Alicia Field. Her email address is there at the bottom of the screen. They've also got their big, this is the, again, Greater Reston Chamber of Commerce, their 12th annual Government Contracting, Matchmaking, and Conference Expo. It's over at the same place as last year, Sheraton Reston, from 8 to 1 on May 2nd. We will be there and hope to see you there. Stop by our booth. Do you want help winning government contracts? BidSpeed can help. Users can find bidding opportunities from federal, state, and local government. Additionally, you can search for teaming partners, incumbent point of contact, expiring contracts, compliance matrix, and also proposal templates. Create your login today at bidspeed.com. BidSpeed is an official partner of the US SBA's 7J Management and Technical Assistance Program, which I believe is undergoing a name change. Next up, we want to thank the Federal Business Council, FBC. Events are the ultimate engagement channel to bring government and industry together. 68% of government personnel report that they attend more than one event each year. FBC has worked with government and industry for 45 plus years to create gatherings where ideas are shared and to help government achieve its goals. This includes agency industry days, cybersecurity symposiums, tech expos, and offsite meetings. FBC provides full lifecycle meeting planning and event management. With over 5,000 meetings under their belt, FBC has the experience, systems, and personnel to make your next event exceptional. Learn more at fbcinc.com. Last but not least, GovBrew. Please check out our friends over at GovBrew. GovBrew is the most read government contracting newsletter, keeping thousands of government contracting professionals in the loop with news, updates, and opportunities in the federal contracting market. All in a fun and accessible email that only takes 5 minutes to read. It's 100% free to join. It goes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. It's filled with great content, event postings, webinars, and more. We encourage you to sign up at govbrew.co, or you can use the QR code you see on the screen. Okay, the reason that we're here today is actually to talk about the FAR, more specifically FAR Part 23. We've got the dynamic duo here of Tamara McNulty and Allison Giwax. Tamara is with Potomac Law Group, and Allison is with Smith, Curry, and Hancock. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to put myself on mute, and ladies, I'll wait for you guys to tell me when you're ready for your next slide.
Thank you, Jennifer, very much. This is Tamara McNulty, and Allison and I are really pleased to be here with you today. We did this one together back in 2020 when we were still working at the same firm. We both moved on to other places, but obviously we've remained friends and in touch. So we're happy to be here today. We'll take the next slide, please. So as everyone knows, the government has just a huge purchasing footprint. We have, they purchase on average about $450 billion in goods and services in any year. And $74 billion of that is spent on IT equipment and services, spends $3.5 billion a year to provide energy to its facility. It owns or leases approximately 630,000 vehicles, and that's worldwide. And this stat always blows me away. 1 in every 5 acres in the U.S. is managed or owned by the U.S. government. It has a real property portfolio of about 750,000 assets, including over 275,000 buildings. That's striking to me. Next slide. So what is FAR Part 23? Well, it concerns the government's policies and procedures for various things. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge. The government's program for ensuring a drug-free workplace. Plus, it also includes protecting and improving the quality of the environment and fostering markets for sustainable technologies, material products, and services. And finally, encouraging the operation of safe vehicles. The largest part of it is absolutely taken up by Part 2, but we'll talk about all of it. Next slide. So let's start with what is sustainable acquisition? Well, sustainable acquisition is more than just purchasing products to further the government's energy and environmental goals. It's a major purchaser of services, so it can also mandate that its service providers use sustainable products in their delivery of those services. The government mandates this in FAR Part 23. Next slide. part of this presentation is going to walk through the requirements that are implemented by the various subparts of FAR Part 23. First of all, we're going to talk about the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which deals with recycled content. We're going to talk about, it deals with the Farm Security and Rural Investment Act of the 2002 Farm Bill, and the 2008 and 2014 Farm Bills as well. And this deals with bio-based content. It implements the Energy Policy Act of 1992 and 2005 for energy efficient products and alternative fuel vehicles. I can speak. The Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 for building energy efficiency, an area which I have a lot of experience and enjoy immensely. The Clean Air Act for ozone depleting substances and alternatives to those ozone depleting substances, and the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990 for chemicals. Next slide. We're going to skip this slide because we actually have it in our program twice, and it actually fits better into health support. So next slide. Let's start with subpart 23.1, the Sustainable Acquisition Policy. That is where it's implemented. So 95 of new contracts must include provisions that require products that are energy efficient, Energy Star or CMMC designated, water efficient projects, bio-based products, environmentally preferable, for example, EPEAT registered products, non-ozone depleting, or made with recovered materials. Next slide. So the subpart applies to new contracts for products or services, including construction services, but it doesn't apply to contracts performed outside the United States or weapon systems. And here was where we're going to hit our first loophole. Agencies do have the power to exempt certain other contracting activities under FAR Part 23.1. These are mostly related to law enforcement, intelligence, or national security for obvious reasons. Next slide. Subpart 23.2 relates to energy and water efficiency and renewable energy. It's about acquiring energy consuming products. For example, procuring Energy Star or CMMC designated projects. These are available online at the link that we've attached in the presentation. Agencies must purchase projects that meet CMMC's standby power wattage recommendations or document the reasons for not purchasing such items. If CMMC hasn't provided a wattage recommendation, then agencies must purchase items that use no more than 1 watt in standby power consuming mode. Agencies must specify for construction or services contracts products that comply with these requirements. And the required contracting clause that you'll see in your contract is going to be FAR Part 52.223-15, energy efficiency in energy consuming products. Next slide. So what does this subpart apply to exactly? Well, it applies to all acquisitions, including those below the simplified acquisition threshold or below the micro purchase threshold in the U.S. and its outlying areas, not in other countries. Agencies conducting acquisitions outside these areas must still use their best efforts, however, to comply with FAR Part 23.2. Note that this applies to acquisitions made using a U.S. government purchase card, as well as traditional procurement. So here's our loophole number 2. There is an exemption if the agency had determined in writing that no Energy Star or CMMC designated product is reasonably available that meets the functional requirements, or that no CMMC or Energy Star product is cost effective over the life of the project, taking the cost savings of the energy into account. Next slide. So one of the things that is discussed in FAR Part 23.2 is energy savings performance contracting. Energy savings performance contracts essentially are contracts that take existing buildings, they do energy audits, see what energy is being expended and how much is being, how much that energy is costing. And from that, they devise a contract where the contractor who agrees to do the energy savings performance contracting funds the upgrades to the energy power systems itself. It self-funds that. And then the government uses the savings that they get over a period of time, up to 25 years, to pay the contractor back for the cost that it outlays. So these are long-term contracts with, and contractors have to have the wherewithal, the financing ability to pay for the work up front. FAR Part 23205 requires agencies to use ESPCs when life cycle cost effective to reduce energy use and cost in the agency's facilities and operations. This has been going on now for well over 15 years, maybe even going on 20 now. I was involved in some of the earliest ESPC contracts, and there's some really fun and interesting wrinkles with regard to the fact that this is construction, but bonding in particular is a fun little wrinkle, because it's now, there's a third-party financer as well as bonding companies. So anyway, look, that's a little aside. Next slide. FAR Part 23.3 is hazardous material identification and material safety data. So if you're expecting to use hazardous materials during your contract performance, you must submit material data sheets prior to the contract award by the apparent successful offer only. Not everybody has to do this. And at time of delivery. The required clauses are different for DoD and all other agencies. The DoD clause is found at FAR 52.223-3, and all other agencies use FAR 52.223-3 alternate 1. Next slide. FAR Part 23.4 is the use of recovered materials and bio-based products. The government wants to encourage the purchase of materials containing recovered materials and bio-based products that are designated by the EPA and USDA. So EPA designated items are products that are or can be made with recovered materials and for which EPA has provided recommended practices for buying these products. They have currently identified 61 items, and you can find those 61 items that have recommended practices at the link we've attached. USDA designated items are a generic grouping of products that can be made with bio-based materials for which the USDA has provided purchasing recommendations. So they've currently identified 139 items that they have provided purchasing recommendations for. 139, sorry. And you can find those items in the link we have provided. Next paragraph. So what does this Part 23.4 apply to? Well, it's EPA, USDA designated items. If the price of the designated item is more than $10,000 or the aggregate amount paid for the designated items or functionality equivalent designated items in the preceding fiscal year was more than $10,000. I think we need to move a slide ahead. Yep, there we go. So agencies are required to establish an affirmative procurement program for these designated items. If their purchases of these designated items exceed the thresholds that I just mentioned. But this is loophole number 3. These programs must require that 100% of purchases of EPA or USDA designated items contain recovered material or bio-based content unless the item cannot be acquired competitively within a reasonable time frame, meeting reasonable performance standards or a reasonable price. So there's always a loophole in each of these sections of FAR Part 23 to give a little bit of wiggle room to the government in order to make it just a little bit easier here. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison, and she's going to fill you all in on drug-free workplaces. Allison?
Yes, thank you, Tamara. So FAR subpart 23.5, drug-free workplace, it applies to pretty much all contracts except those listed on this slide here. Interestingly, one of the exceptions is essentially if it would conflict with law enforcement agencies' undercover operations, which was something that Tamara mentioned earlier. Generally, all offerors have to provide a drug-free workplace by posting certain notices and establishing awareness programs. Next slide, please. So here are the requirements. Note that this concerns a contractor's responsibility. That means that if you do not comply with this, instead of just being non-responsive to a solicitation, you would be found non-responsible, which is different. So it's something you want to be aware of regarding the published statements, as well as the ongoing drug-free awareness program. Next slide. 23.6, probably the simplest one we're going to talk about here today. It's self-explanatory. The contractor has to notify the contracting officer prior to delivery of radioactive material on a project. Doesn't often apply to a lot of the folks I work with, but if it does, if this is an issue for you, just take a look and read 23.6 to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. Next slide. Contracting for environmentally preferred products and services. Agencies must implement preference programs to promote energy efficiency, water conservation, and acquisition of environmentally preferable products and services. The FAR contains a list of the required environmental objections that all contractors have to implement. They're here on this slide. They range from incredibly vague, like realized life cycle cost savings, to actionable, such as purchase only plastic rain carriers that are degradable. If we move on to the next slide, we'll see that there are special rules regarding acquiring electronic products. We talked about Energy Star products before, but this is a little bit different. The FAR has an electronic products environmental assessment tool, along with a registry online at epeat.net of registered electronic products. When acquiring an electronic product to meet an agency's requirements, the agency has to meet at least 95% of these requirements with an EP registered electronic product. Electronic products, these will be pretty much all your tech in your office. So when you're buying monitors, for example, in addition to being Energy Star rated, they also should be from the EPEAT registry. Next slide, please. So ozone depleting substances and greenhouse gas emissions. I want to caveat this by noting that what we're talking about is the way that that FAR Part 23 exists currently. We're going to talk at the end of this about changes that are coming, particularly with regard to greenhouse gas emissions. But I think they're slightly different than what we described here, but I just want to make sure everyone's aware of it. They're not currently in place, but they're going to be there's going to be pretty big changes. So FAR subpart 23.8 requires the government to comply with those requirements that we make corporations have to comply with in the Clean Air Act, specifically with regard to procurement of fridges, HVAC cleaning supplies, anything else that may contain an ozone depleting substance. This includes things like generally giving preferences to more environmentally friendly sources, with regard to the product itself, as well as the manufacturing process in making the product. Next slide. Environmental management systems. This is another agency requirement, but don't zone out quite just yet because there's some potential flow down opportunities. Generally, agencies are required to implement environmental management systems at every organization level. Further, if a contractor's activities affect that agency's environmental management, the EMS requirements have to be included in your contracts and flowed down. This is required in any contract or solicitation where you're dealing with a facility that is owned or leased by the government in the US. Next slide. Right to know laws, pollution prevention requirements. This is another subpart that applies for a government facility. Essentially, a contractor has to provide whatever information the government needs to comply with the laws and executive orders and the government's EMS regarding any toxic chemical or toxic hazardous substances. This is required in every new contract where we're dealing with a government facility or a federal government facility. All right, next slide. This is a relatively new requirement. I know it was new when we talked about, or it was one of the newer ads when we talked about this 4 years ago. There is no exception here. Every single contract has to include a clause that requires contractors and subcontractors to ban texting and driving. Something that's really interesting here that I thought about recently was, if for those of you who are up to date on your Christian doctrine law, that means that even if you leave out a clause in a contract, the government can still say that the clause is in the contract because it's so important to a fundamental procurement policy, and it's mandatory that it will be read in, and this is a Christian doctrine clause. So agencies have to encourage all contractors and subcontractors to adopt and enforce these policies, and the clause will be flowed down. Okay, new updates, next slide. Okay, so this is incredibly important, and this is new within the last year or so. We could probably spend an hour just talking about these new updates. We're going to try and keep it concise as we got about 15 minutes left. So what's going to change? Contractors will be required to disclose greenhouse gas emissions and to set science-based emission reduction targets for public viewing on their websites. Further, contractors are going to have to complete an inventory of their greenhouse gas emissions. Contractors, this implements 2 executive orders. There was a proposed rule issued in 2022. The comments were so extensive that it was extended into 2023. Over 38,000 comments were received. There's no final rule issued yet, so we don't know what from the comments is going to be implemented, but we're going to talk about the rule as it was last released, the proposed rule, and what that might mean for you. Generally, the focus is on prime contractors who do a, quote, substantial amount of government contracting. I think what you're going to find out as we're going through this is if you're a subcontractor, you're going to realize that this is going to hit you as well. And that substantial amount of government contracting is frankly a relative term. Next slide. So where does it apply? It's going to apply to the US. When we talk about the US in a lot of these, always check to see what the clause says. If it says United States without any other elaboration, you're probably talking about the US territories, what you think of as US customs territory, including Guam, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, etc. Next slide. Okay, so when is it effective? It depends on how you're categorized. This rule has a few different categories of contractors, and we'll get into what those mean. Significant contractors will be required to complete their greenhouse gas emission inventories and disclosures within 1 year after publication of the final rule. Major contractors will have 2 years. And I know, honestly, if I didn't know what the breakdown was between the two groups, I would have no idea which one was a higher dollar value and which one was a lower dollar value. Significant contractors are the lower tier, major contractors are the higher tier. So why do major contractors have so much longer to comply? It's going to be a pain in the butt. That's why. That's the only reason. All right. It's going to be a huge pain, and it's going to be incredibly expensive and difficult to bring yourself into compliance with this. In fact,
not to mention incredibly confusing.
Oh my God, yeah, it's going to be a nightmare. And frankly, it's so recognized that it's going to be a nightmare that the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2024 actually prohibits DoD from requiring traditional defense contractors to disclose their greenhouse gas inventory or emissions as a condition to award until the end of this year. So nobody can implement it early. They need to give everyone lots of time to get this done. Next slide. All right, to whom will it apply? Here are the groups. Significant contractors, if the total sum in federal contract obligations for the prior fiscal year is between 7.5 million and 50 million. If you look at those numbers, no, that's not a typo. Yes, I think they should add a 0 to everything here, because I think 7.5 million in total federal contract obligations is going to hit a lot of small businesses, particularly in the tech sphere. I mean, that could be a few contracts if you have a good MATOC, if you're on a supply schedule. Very easy to hit the $7.5 million threshold. So I think that was probably mentioned in the comments that these thresholds are really going to hit small businesses hard. Next slide. Okay, there are some exempt contractors. I want to draw your attention, we can't go through all these. The big one I want to draw your attention to is nonprofit contractors and small business contractors. There's a partial exemption. Specifically, if you are a major contractor, remember major is that bigger group. If you're a major contractor that is also considered a small business for purpose of your primary NAICS code in SAM, or where the major contractor is a nonprofit, you are not required to complete annual climate disclosures or associated SAM reporting requirements, but you are required to complete your inventories and report those inventories in SAM. Next slide. Okay, so when I talked about what you have to do if you're a small business contractor, it's a major contractor, you know, it might be a little bit more helpful if we talk about what your actual deliverables are under this proposed rule. There's 3 major types of deliverables. One is the greenhouse gas inventory. This is a listing of all the different types of greenhouse gas emissions that emanate from your activities, your annual climate disclosure that tells the amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as science-based targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. Okay, so there are different categories of emissions, and I know I may be losing some of you, because if you're confused, I'm just as confused as you are, but there are different types of greenhouse gas emissions. What do you have to include in these disclosures when you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions? There's 3 different scopes. One is the direct emissions, scope 1, from sources owned or controlled by the contractor. Do you own a factory? Do you own company vehicles? Those would be included in scope 1. Then there's scope 2, this indirect emissions essentially associated with generation of electricity, heating, cooling, steam, etc., if they're not owned by you. So this is largely going to be, I think electricity is going to be the big one for folks. This third one, which is probably where I think a lot of you are going to, or there's going to be a lot of questions, emissions as a consequence of contractor operation, not owned by the contractor. So, you know, investments, transportation, processing, franchises, it's very broad.
This one is the one that I know my clients have the most consternation with, and what exactly is this, and how in the world do I figure this out?
What does it mean? It's nuts. And then, you know, there's upstream activities and downstream activities. So how are we going to categorize all these things? Next slide. So looking back, think of that chart that we looked at before with the contractors, where you're either not applicable because it's under 7.5, you're a significant contractor, or a major contractor. If you're a significant contractor, which I think is where a lot of small businesses are going to be, you only need to do your greenhouse gas inventory and annual climate disclosure for scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So that scope 3 that we said was going to be a real pain, you don't have to worry about that. If you are a major contractor, you have to complete all 3 deliverables, not just the greenhouse gas inventory and annual climate disclosure, for all 3 scopes. That partial exemption I talked about for small businesses, DoD non-traditional contractors, that essentially says if you're a major subcontractor, you have to treat yourself like a significant subcontractor in a way. It's not quite equal, but that's the simplest way to think about it. If you're a small business and you're a major subcontractor, think of yourself like a significant subcontractor, and your requirements are going to be more in line with that. So it's not an actual exemption. It just removes some of the heat from you. Next slide. All right, so what's really interesting about this is another responsibility standard. FAR Part 9 is going to be amended to make clear that if you are a prospective contractor and you have not complied with these disclosure requirements, including in SAM, the contracting officer will presume that a prospective contractor is not responsible and therefore ineligible for award. There are some exceptions that are in there, and there are waivers that you can get. We don't know a ton about the waiver process. They're going to be very high level. They're going to be very specific. And remember, responsibility standard, if you are rejected from award because of this, if you're a small business, this is a responsibility factor. This means that before an agency can bump you out of competition, they need to kick that to the Small Business Administration for a certificate of competency. So a lot of these FAR Part 23 requirements are in fact responsibility related. This is going to be no different. Next slide, please. But what other ways may this impact procurement? What else are the contracting officers going to be doing with all this information? They might not have to use this as part of a best value assessment, but they're suddenly going to have all of your greenhouse gas emissions in SAM. It's going to be ready and able to be disclosed. Is this going to be made part of the best value assessment? If, for example, an offeror has a lower price, but their greenhouse gas emissions are significantly higher than competitors, are they going to consider that? How much importance is going to be put on this? I guess that's going to really depend, frankly, on the agency, the project, the CO. If the agency has internally set environmental initiatives, that's going to play into account. And then, of course, all these supplements, all the FAR supplements that we have, they're probably also going to be amended in a way that's consistent, if not more strict, particularly environmental related agencies. Next slide. All right, we closed with 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you both so much.
Sorry, let me just, we know that probably that last section was probably a little concerning, confusing, terrifying. The legal industry, for those of us who practice government contract law, we're watching it closely. Not a final rule yet, but it is going to be a major change to FAR Part 23 when they finally do release the final rule, and we'll be around to talk to you about it because we'll keep an eye on it.
Great. This was an excellent presentation. I feel like I learned a little bit. Thank you both, Tamara and Allison. If anyone is currently listening or live or perhaps the recording, you've got questions, you've got contact information here, and I'm going to move to the next slide as well for Allison's contact information. So feel free to reach out to both ladies. They can certainly help you. And like I said, the recording will be on our website, but before that, it'll be on our YouTube channel, probably within the next couple hours. So if you subscribe to our channel, it doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get an alert when it gets uploaded. So thanks to Tamara and Allison. Any last words before we close out the webinar?
Thank you all for attending.
Yes, thanks everyone for listening to us on this FAR Part 23, and reach out to either one of us if you have any questions on the new rules or the existing rules.
Sounds good. Thanks everybody who joined us, and thanks again to our great speakers, and we'll see you on Friday when we cover the next part of the FAR. Thanks everybody, and have a good rest of your day.